In a small, forgotten town, at the end of an overgrown road, stood the Hollow House. The townsfolk never spoke about it, but the house had stood empty for as long as anyone could remember. Legend had it that once you entered, you never came out. No one dared to approach the house, especially at night, for fear of what they might see, or worse, what might see them. One chilly October evening, 4 friends, Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Emma, gathered around a bonfire near the edge of the woods. The air was filled with the sweet scent of burning wood, and their laughter echoed into the silent trees. The conversation drifted, as it often did, toward the Hollow House. Jake, always the skeptic, dismissed the warnings as nothing more than superstitions. "I bet it's just an old house." "You guys are scared of nothing," Jake scoffed, tossing another stick into the fire. Emma shivered. "I don't know, Jake. People say weird things happen there." "Like what?" Jake grinned. "Ghosts? Monsters? Please. I bet I could spend the whole night there and come back fine." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Is that a challenge?" Sarah chimed in, "How about we all go? Just for an hour. It's not that far, and we can prove to Jake that it's more than just a scary story." The group hesitated, but curiosity got the best of them. Armed with nothing but flashlights and their phones, they set off down the path leading to the house. The wind picked up as they neared the Hollow House, sending dry leaves skittering across the ground. The house loomed larger with each step, its windows dark and gaping, like the hollow eyes of a skull. "Well, here we are," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady as they reached the front porch. The boards creaked under their feet, and the door, surprisingly, wasn't locked. It swung open with a long, eerie groan, as though the house itself was inviting them inside. The air inside was heavy, damp with the smell of decay. Every step they took seemed to echo off the empty walls. The house was bigger than it looked from the outside, with winding hallways and shadowy corners. Their flashlights flickered as if something in the house didn't want them to see. "Let's split up and look around," Jake suggested, his voice falsely confident. "Bad idea," Sarah muttered under her breath, but no one seemed to hear her. Mark and Sarah took the upstairs, while Jake and Emma stayed on the ground floor. The silence was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps behind them. Upstairs, Mark opened a door to a small bedroom. It was bare, except for a single chair facing the window. As he approached, a gust of wind blew through the room, though the window was shut tight. "Do you feel that?" Mark whispered. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. The temperature in the room had dropped dramatically. They hurried out, back into the hallway, but something was wrong. The hallway seemed longer than before, as if the house was stretching, shifting around them. Downstairs, Emma found an old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. As she stared into it, something moved behind her, only it wasn't Jake. She spun around, but the room was empty. "Jake," she called out. No answer. Her heartbeat quickened as the darkness around her seemed to thicken, swallowing the weak beam of her flashlight. Suddenly, a loud bang came from upstairs, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Emma screamed. "Jake," she shouted again, but her voice echoed unnaturally in the house, as if the walls were whispering her name back to her. Upstairs, Mark and Sarah ran toward the sound of Emma's scream, but the stairs twisted in impossible directions. They were trapped. The house was changing, the walls shifting, as though it was alive. The doors they had just passed were now gone, replaced by cold, solid walls. They pounded on them, their breath coming in short gasps. "Mark!" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on something behind him. Slowly, Mark turned, and there in the darkness stood a figure, tall, pale, with hollow eyes that gleamed red in the flickering light. The figure didn't move, but they could feel its cold gaze piercing through them. In a blind panic, they bolted down the twisted hallway, the figure's footsteps echoing behind them, closer with each second. They could hear Jake shouting from somewhere below, but his voice was distant, distorted. Meanwhile, Jake had found himself in the basement, though he had no idea how he got there. The air was thick, choking him with the stench of rot. His flashlight flickered, and for a moment, he was plunged into darkness. When the light came back on, he saw them, hundreds of faces, staring at him from the walls, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Jake stumbled back, tripping over something soft. He looked down and realized with horror that it was a pile of shoes, old, decaying shoes, covered in dust. But there were no bodies. Emma's screams echoed through the house again, but they were cut short, leaving only an eerie silence in their wake. Jake! Mark's voice cracked as he finally made his way down the stairs, dragging Sarah behind him. The house was closing in on them, its walls shifting, the air growing colder by the second. "Where's Emma?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. But Jake only shook his head. "We need to get out of here, now." The house groaned, as if in response. Doors slammed, and the floor beneath them creaked and buckled. They raced for the front door, but it was gone, replaced by a solid wall. The windows were no longer windows, just blank spaces in the walls. The hollow house had them now. As they huddled together in the dark, a voice whispered through the walls, soft and cold, "You shouldn't have come here." And then, the lights went out.